You are listening to the Football Diehards podcast with your hosts, Justin Lonero and Bob Harris, sponsored by DraftKings. Sign up now using promo code DIEHARDS, DIEHARDS. Make a first-time $5 deposit, and you'll receive a free $3 ticket.
Hello, and welcome to the Football Diehards podcast. I'm your host, Justin Lonero, along with my co-hosts, Mr. Bob Harris, Mr. Kyle Dvorchak, on Twitter, at Kyle Tweets Here, and Mr. Bob Harris is at Football Diehard. Gentlemen, it is August. Things are heating up. We are on a weekly basis now. It is good to have you men on this evening. Mr. Harris, what is going on in Albuquerque, New Mexico this evening?
The usual kind of stuff. We've got the August update premium content at thefootballdiehards.com. It's rolling. Constantly updated rankings, articles from the likes of Kyle, myself, constant flow of news. We'll have contributions from you undoubtedly beyond the podcast, Justin. And I think one thing that everyone needs to give a try is the mock draft simulator is working great. Just jump in. You can do a mock draft in a matter of minutes. You make your picks. The machine makes the others. And kind of go through and see, set up the parameters, do what you need, and get in there and get your hands dirty with the draft. And then I'm prepping. Kyle and I will be in Canton, Ohio this weekend, Sunday, the 18th in particular. From noon to 6 p.m. It's the Midwest Fantasy Football Expo. We'll find that on Twitter at Midwest FF Expo. So check that out. I'll also be doing the Kings Classic Draft, which is a pretty big draft. It's like 2 drafts in the actual Hall of Fame building. In the actual bust room will be, right next to it anyway. But drafting with some big heavy hitters. There are 14-team leagues. We do a snake draft. We do an auction draft. It's carried live on Sirius. So check that out if you get a chance, and then we'll have a Football Diehards booth at the Expo. So make sure you check that out if you're in the area and you're listening to this before Sunday, August 18th. Kyle and I would love to see you. Well, Kyle would love to see you. I don't really like people, but beyond that, I will be polite and greet you appropriately. So I never smile. So some guys, this week, it just struck me that there's a lot going on. There's always a lot going on. Every offseason, every August, there are things we have to deal with. And it brought to mind, the how do we deal with risk? Now, I know we talked last week about guys like Ezekiel Elliott and Melvin Gordon who are holding out. There is risk associated with those guys. I'm drafting, and I'm in a handful of drafts right now. I know my Sirius co-host Mike Dempsey was in a draft as well tonight, and we were talking after the show, and it's getting around the 8th pick, and Ezekiel Elliott is still there. I'm in a 4for4.com analyst draft. Mike Clay took him at about the 5th pick, I believe. So you kind of see people are a little bit all over the board. And look, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect Ezekiel Elliott to show up. I think one of the things we have to realize is that for both him and Melvin Gordon, they are not Lev Bell. They have contracts, right? Gordon going to the final year, the 5th year of his contract. He has maybe a few more options, but not a ton more. He's kind of pigeonholed too. Zeke Elliott has 2 years left on his contract. If he doesn't show up, he's just in the same boat, going forward. He doesn't really gain anything other than sending a message. So I guess, Justin, the question on these situations, the contract situations, and something people need to keep in mind, the public tip of the iceberg, right, is always the most contentious part, is my feeling, right? So all the work that's going on behind the scenes and under the surface is probably fairly civil and pretty much process-oriented. We just don't see a lot of it. But generally speaking, when there is a contract issue and there are guys, you're thinking, wow, he might miss a game. I mean, you're calculating these things. What is your general approach to the risk in these situations? Are you looking to cash in when the value presents itself? As it is with Zeke, clearly, if he's dropping outside the top 4. And the same with Gordon. Is this something you're looking to leverage, or does one seem riskier than the other? Where are you standing on these?
Well, I think there is room for concern. I think that the running back position, these guys want to get paid, and rightfully so. But the league you're replaceable. We're all replaceable. I think the 3 of us can be in agreement that running backs in particular can be replaced. We saw what happened with James Conner. I think there's room for optimism when you have a guy like Mike Clay taking him at pick 5. It's probably not a $10,000 league. I mean, if that was a $10,000 league, maybe Clay would have faded him there. I don't ever want to be in a position where I have to take a running back in the first round. So with that said, there are guys tonight that I just can't. He's a fade for me, Ezekiel Elliott. So if it puts me in a position where I would say that prior to this, it's Barkley, Zeke, McCaffrey, Kamara, and then after that it could be anybody, DJ, and I'm going to put Mixon, DJ, Connor, certainly Todd Gurley in front of him in a litany of wide receivers. So he's a fade, as is Melvin Gordon, who has a propensity to be hurt. We know what these guys are. I think there's a growing notion now with running backs. They want to be paid, and it's, they don't they don't care about your fantasy team. So I don't see myself investing at a premium, which they both cost because they're both first round guys. If I can go with the safer option, call me conservative.
But I think there's something to be said for that. There's two things. I had Brad Evans, our buddy Yahoo Noise, on the Sirius program yesterday, and he would make the point, fear doesn't win leagues. Being fearful doesn't win leagues.
Sure.
But taking huge risks doesn't win you leagues either, I don't think. And I guess that's the range that you have to decide. And a lot of these things that we're going to talk about tonight are they're going to be based on your own levels of risk tolerance. So, Kyle, let me turn to you and say, there's a clear difference in my levels of concern with Zeke Elliott and Melvin Gordon. I will note that Melvin Gordon now, since he's in his fifth-year option, there are some weird things with his deal. For starters, in addition to the $30,000 a day, the Chargers can be fining him for missing training camp, which most teams usually throw out the window, right? Once they get signed and they're in the fold again. But they're fining him that right now, $30,000 a day. On top of that, they can fine him a game check for every exhibition game he misses. To me, this adds a pretty significant level. I think what is it? 329. It's $329,000 for the first preseason game. Another $329,000 for the next one. Potentially, if he sits out all 4 games, that's $1.3 million. Now, look, Le'Veon Bell would have done that, right? Because hell, he was locked in. So as you kind of work through some of the scenarios and some of the possibilities these players are dealing with, Kyle, your process on assessing the risk involved in holdouts.
Yeah, this podcast is a lot less interesting when Justin's right, which doesn't happen often, but I really kind of agree with him on this because especially for Zeke specifically, you just don't see his ADP giving you any advantage. It's sort of about the upside a pick gives you relative to the downside you take on. It's this risk management idea. And when you look at Zeke, he's not really falling to rounds 2, 3 like we see with Melvin Gordon. So when you're getting him at pick 8, are you really gaining that much by getting him a few picks later when you can just have, are you gaining that much by getting him over DeAndre Hopkins? I don't think you're gaining much at all, really. So, you're gaining a few ADP position spots. And for me, that is not worth the risk of him Le'Veon Belling you last year. Looking at best ball win rates last year, Le'Veon Bell was under 1%. Like, you cannot win if you lose Zeke. There is not, you are walking on water if you think you can win with Ezekiel Elliott if he holds out. And the same is true with Melvin Gordon if you're taking him early. So, the upside is that you gain 3 slots in your draft position in 1 round. You get to jump a few guys to take Ezekiel Elliott. Where the downside is you lose your league on week 1. So in the early rounds, especially rounds 1 and 2, I'm truly 100% risk averse. It's not really a question of sort of what the upside is at that point. It's mostly downside because the upside is you get a few picks advantage, whereas the downside is you lose your league. It's over. You're done. Because you're not really going to come back from that. As much as you think, I can get a guy from the waiver wire. I can get this. I can get that. It's really not going to happen. Where I think you want to capitalize on the risk averse people is last year was a good example with Andrew Luck. He wasn't even throwing he was throwing children's footballs all the way up until warm ups of week 1. But he wasn't costing you a first, second round pick. He was costing you, a double-digit round pick at something that was very replaceable. When if he wasn't hurt, he would have cost you a 6th, 5th round pick because he's Andrew Luck. So you're getting a 5-round discount to where if you lose that bet, it doesn't hurt. This year, early in the offseason, it was Tyreek Hill. And I think a guy who has a more established floor, if you want to look for an early round guy, is Todd Gurley. At least we know he is going to play. So if you want to play the risk game, at least give yourself some sort of floor. Whereas Melvin Gordon and Ezekiel Elliott, their floor is Le'Veon Bell last year. And just put things in perspective, if they get signed and come back, or in Melvin Gordon's case, he has to show up at some point if he wants to get his year of accrued service to the NFL, like it's some sort of army. You get sort of this David Johnson thing where you play a lot of games and you've just lost already because David Johnson was, much like Melvin Gordon would be, unusable. Albeit he was playing, but he was unusable in a lot of his games. He won about 3% of leagues. Another option where it's basically unwinnable. And he played every single game and was productive, highly productive in some games. But it's just taking all of those bad weeks on, and for Melvin Gordon, those bad weeks be even worse. That your ceiling just is not matched by the incredible floor you take on.
That was impressive. And I would tend to agree. I mean, I think there's a level of safeness that you want to have, of course, because you are paying a premium for Ezekiel Elliott. And where you said Melvin Gordon, I'm seeing him off the board at round 4, 5. So if it doesn't work out, oh well, I've already built some of my core for my team. But I think, like you said, and you called it Le'Veon Belling, you're screwed. And then you have to turn to DFS.
But I think we need to stipulate, that these guys are not in the same situation. So,
right.
And I do think that's a trap we can fall into, is we
Sure.
project situations into situations we're familiar with, whether they're that situation or not. Look, I think, you can go all the way back in the Cowboys. And by the way, we are all expendable, Justin more so than the rest of us. But
sure.
Yeah, everyone knows that. But no, and that's the thing. Running back is a position where, Jerry Jones is already talking up Tony Pollard. Even after kind of a crappy game, I didn't think he would look that impressive. He looked great in practices apparently, but I didn't think he looked that impressive. And there's Jerry Jones. He's our guy. And now you're hearing the Alvin Kamara comparisons, and you hear a lot of this kind of talk. And I think in the end, for me, Ezekiel Elliott, I'm still okay with. I don't think there's, Jerry Jones' history is, okay, so they lose the first 2 games and he starts squealing for Zeke like he squealed for Emmett, right? I think that's possible, but I do agree. I think when you're drafting with your first round, and this is something my serious colleague Jeff Mans has always preached as well. You don't need to take chances in the first round. You just don't need to. And I think at that point, so in the range where Elliott would be going, or certainly later on with Gordon, there are players in that same range that I like a hell of a lot. And maybe I go ahead and go with one of the wide receivers in the first round that I really like. If I can get DeAndre Hopkins, if I can get Julio Jones, if I can get Devontae Adams, one of those 3, and come back around and get that next running back that I also really like, which is maybe the Nick Chubb, Dalvin Cook level. So I think you have to take that into account too. Look at where you're picking. Look at what you're getting that's maybe safer, or you feel is safer. And again, this may be a range of things where you say, look, I'm not worried at all about Zeke. I think he's showing up. And I do. And I'm drafting him at the appropriate time based on that, but I'm not looking, I'm not gaining a ton of value as was mentioned. So I think, again, risk tolerance is going to be a big deal, but you can't assess these situations based on past situations much. We have
Sure.
to be careful to evaluate them for what they are now, and take a few minutes to study them. A lot of this information is available on the site of the actual situations these guys are in financially, what they're on the hook for. For Zeke, not showing up, not only is he in the same position he is this year, he's in the same position for the next 2 years after this. And honestly, the Cowboys could franchise him another 2 years and lock him up for 4 years, essentially. And I wonder, this is also, kind of a side note, I wonder why more players don't play the franchise game like Kirk Cousins did so successfully in Washington before he moved on and leveraged that into an even bigger deal in Minnesota. But, it's running back, so it's a difficult position. Anyhow, bottom line, is anyone who raise your hand or say I if you're out on Zeke in round 1? Kyle? Justin?
I'm out. I am certainly out.
I'm in on Zeke in round 1. It's
Really?
the right time. Yeah, I'm
Now, high stakes league, gun to your head, he's sitting there, pick 9, pick 10, say it's $1,000, one of these huge leagues in Vegas.
I'm probably looking at other ways. So, and that's something we should stipulate as well. So I'm in, triple digit best balls, and 30 redraft leagues and dynasty leagues.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a little bit of ability to, lay off on guys or buy into guys, and I can mitigate that risk. But that's the other thing, and we'll talk about this at some point as we work through the issues with some other guys. But mitigation is something else you can do, right? And I mean that maybe in Zeke's case, that is drafting Tony Pollard late, or maybe not as late as you would like to, maybe a little earlier than you would like to, knowing you get the upside of Zeke, and maybe you have the guy that's his handcuff, but handcuffing is risky business. So let's look at some of the guys. There's a series of guys that are injured right now, and I think to varying degrees. Look, the Andrew Luck thing is the one that's going out of control right now, because in the last 2 days, I mean, we've gone from 0 to 60 pretty damn quick in terms of, it's not just a strained calf, it's an ankle issue, and we don't really know what the hell it is. We kind of know what it is. We're changing the rehab. Right now, the word is they are going to make a decision on his week 1 availability at the end of the third preseason game. I guess I'll put it this way. I'll start with you, Kyle. Is he now in 10-foot pole territory? Wouldn't touch him with my 10-foot pole, or is this something you're looking to leverage the value on?
Geez, don't tell me about your 10-foot pole. I don't want to think about that. No.
Again?
For him, it was really a case of I wasn't buying in the first place. I have a few shares across my 10 billion best ball leagues because you play enough of them and everyone wants to go late round QB. Eventually, you'll find one where there's a good value on Andrew Luck. But generally speaking, at his ADP, I just wasn't taking an early quarterback. I was looking for later steals like for me, Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson. But pick your flavor of late round QB. Anything really works. So I wasn't too invested in him anyways. This is just another reason to get off of early round quarterback in general. So for me, I was mostly out before, and now I'm 100% out.
If he falls down to quarterback 10, maybe I draft him as quarterback 10 in the leagues I'm in. That's going to be a pretty late pick. And then I'm going to back him up with a Phillip Rivers or, a Kirk Cousins, someone who's still going to be going later in the draft. If I really feel like he's going to turn back into Andrew Luck, I'm not sure I feel like that, though, with this one. How do you feel about this one, Justin?
I feel like we're having deja vu here. I mean, it was like this time last year where he hasn't even picked up the Duke yet. Then he goes on to throw 39 touchdowns and almost 4,600 yards. So I would agree with Kyle here. Even a 100% healthy Andrew Luck on that offense, phenomenal offensive line, weapons galore. You're still paying somewhat of a premium for him, and that's not my cup of tea. You're putting him right in that Aaron Rodgers land. I like a shade after if I'm going to pay somewhat of a premium, which I do not do, which is the Matt Ryan range or the Baker Mayfield, Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz is somebody that I'm on, but I'm with you in the Kirk Cousins range. I think Cam Newton is growing on me by the moment. You can get a hell of a discount on him as well, and obviously the Wilsons and the Roethlisbergers. So it seems like each year we have more and more options. It doesn't make sense for me, talk about risk being attached, to pay an Andrew Luck premium. Yeah, we can throw 40 touchdowns. We can throw 45 potentially. But deja vu, wasn't going to have him if he was 100% healthy. Maybe a little where you said if you play in a bunch of leagues, you can afford to have a little Andrew Luck, just like, unfortunately, I have a little bit of Patrick Mahomes because I'm playing that many leagues. But you are paying a premium for some of these guys, and you can certainly wait.
Another thing I want to bring up is format, where if I'm looking at a best ball format and I wanted to maybe just go 2 quarterbacks, I'm not in any way taking Andrew Luck because if he misses time, I'm down to 1 quarterback. I'm taking a 0 at quarterback at some point. That's already a huge disadvantage to play with. Whereas if I'm playing in a home league where streaming quarterbacks is easy, there are tons of quarterbacks on the waiver wire who get easy matchups in terms of the defense they play. If you just pick up whoever plays Kansas City, they're going to have to throw 100 times to keep up with Patrick Mahomes. So if I have access to the waiver wire, I'm fine with taking a massive risk at quarterback. Say Andrew Luck starts to fall, 8, 9, 10 round. I'm fine with that because the upside is immense, but my floor is still like a top 15 quarterback over the season by streaming. And that doesn't even include the fact that maybe you pick up the next great hype quarterback that comes off the waiver wire. So there's a lot of avenues for you to have a high floor. Whereas in best ball, you could just bomb that. But then when you look at maybe in a best ball tournament, if you're going for gold, taking a lot of risk is how you're going to do that. The people taking Tyreek Hill would attest to this. Now they've got these rosters that look stacked. So, I mean, it really depends on your format. If you're shooting for ceiling, it's something different. And if you have access to the waiver wire, which gives you an incredibly high floor, that should also impact how you look at all of these situations, not just a quarterback.
But I do feel quarterback is a special position where we do have a lot of options and different ways we can go. So I think the consensus here is we're all like chicks on Tinder looking at Justin and swiping left, right?
I don't even know if Tinder works, but I get it. Sure. I get the joke.
I'm like old. I don't even know what Tinder is. Okay, so that brings me to Antonio Brown. And if anyone saw the week 2 episode of Hard Knocks, they kind of went into some detail about the feet, which he feels like were circumcised. Ouch. A lot of skin issues on the bottom of his feet. The helmet seems like it's a non-issue, so we can kind of throw that out. But there are multiple layers of risk here. Am I right? Are we looking at not just the feet, Justin, but a new team, a different quarterback? You know, the grass is not always greener on the other side. He was in a pretty damn good offense in a pretty certain situation. I don't know. This one makes me a little nervous just in terms of the risk beyond the feet. How are you dealing with this one?
I tweeted something out earlier with an Elvis Presley song attached to it. Return to sender. You know, as if Oakland's going to say, you know, why do we do this? Why do we sign up for this? And you're right. I mean, the teams are drastically different. 133 times less Derek Carr slung the ball than Ben Roethlisberger 2018. I think the fact of the matter is we yearn for a discount with a player like this. He's only 31. He is AB, and he's not going to be with Ben Roethlisberger anymore. Maybe a geographical relocation can help him. But the ingredients here are not really fun to play with. He lost the grievance with the helmet. He's got the feet thing going on. He's there. Maybe we know he's a competitor, so that's a good thing. And we know Derek Carr is not as bad as some people make him out to be. And there's not a ton of weapons. We know Kyle likes Tyrell Williams, but outside of Williams and a young, ambiguous backfield, Antonio Brown could get peppered with targets underneath. And no longer are we paying that early first-round premium for him. I've got him in the 3rd round, I think, in the Scott Fishbowl, which is Antonio Brown. He's not dead. It's almost like Todd Gurley. People are talking about like Todd Gurley was dead. Like, let's wait a minute. So based on targets alone, I think there has to be some allure there. Late round 2, even in the middle of round 2, it's Antonio Brown. This guy he's not coming off an Achilles or a bad knee injury. Yeah, he'll miss a game or 2. He's missed 3 over the last 3 seasons, or 4, I should say. I'm in, and as we talk about often, the price is baked into it. Do I want Antonio Brown with all this circus crap going on right now, round 1? Absolutely not. Will I take him round 2, late round 2? Certainly. In round 3, if he falls, early round 3, every single time.
Wait, when you go to the circus, the clown car is part of the deal, right, Kyle? I mean, this is what you get with Antonio Brown. That aspect of it, right? There's going to be some drama. Look, we can look at the whole helmet thing. We can look at the feet, and that, I don't look at that as drama. I look at that as just, something odd, a unique occurrence that probably he has learned from. But I mean, in general, there's going to be some drama. I think at the ADP though, and the fact that it's wide receiver where you're going to have multiple starters, that makes it a lot easier to handle this level of possible hijinks.
Yeah, we talk about Antonio Brown having skin in the game. It's going to be hard for him too if he doesn't have skin on the feet. But
I see what you did.
This
there.
is actually just a bad joke podcast. We've come to the open mic night.
Mine were really good. I thought. Wait, what?
Don't eat the meatloaf. We're here all night, folks.
Anyway, yeah, but like Justin was saying, the floor for Antonio Brown is like playing on a bad offense with all of the targets, like all of them. Look at the targets, he gets them all. So that is a much different floor than when you look at a running back who says he won't play unless he gets a new deal. And when you look at Antonio Brown going right now, Football Diehards ADP has him at 23. The guys above him, yeah, I'll take them before him when they come up. Mike Evans, Nick Chubb, 2 guys going just 2 spots ahead of him. Those are guys I'll take ahead of him. But the guys behind him, Leonard Fournette, Stephon Diggs, no, I'll probably still take Antonio Brown. So I think the price is right on him. I don't have a ton of Antonio Brown because I don't think I'm getting a ton of value on him. The guy above him, Mike Evans, I basically have as the sort of Antonio Brown sits right between the next tier of wide receivers and the tier of possible wide receiver, like high-end wide receiver ones. He kind of caps that tier off. So for me, Mike Evans is a much better pick, one spot ahead. But I don't think that makes Antonio Brown a bad pick at 23. The only other guy I think I'd consider behind him is Adam Thielen, who just gets overlooked every year, and I can't put my finger on why. But, for me, the price is about right, and there is a floor of playing, assumedly, a whole season, and a lot of targets throughout that season. It's not my favorite pick. I don't feel great when I get Antonio Brown there. I don't feel like I've crushed the draft. But it's not a bad pick, and like Justin was saying, he falls later in some drafts. That's really where you capitalize on the value.
Yeah, I think, for me, I think the discount is baked in, right? I mean, we're talking about the top receiver in fantasy football for 5 years running or so, or along with DeAndre Hopkins. Look, I mean, I'm not going to sell anyone short, but I mean, Antonio Brown has consistently been as high end a producer as anybody. So I think the fact that he slipped down, outside of that first, second round, maybe into the third round, a little bit of a discount baked in, and I think that's a reasonable gamble at that point, especially at that position. Or a less reasonable gamble for me would be like AJ Green, because we don't know how many games he's going to miss. I think it's hard to even assess the risk there, and I think I'm avoiding that altogether. But then I'll see him at a certain point. When is that point for you guys on a guy with not a finite return, but he can be a high-end player? We've seen it. He's older. A lot of moving pieces there, Justin. Is this one you would just prefer to avoid? Are there enough guys at the position that you feel like you can pivot in a different direction? Or are you looking to leverage this one into value?
You're seeing him in round 5 in some drafts, round 6, and it's tempting because it's AJ Green. But the fact of we're not going to give in. But we will go ahead and draft Tyler Boyd, who developed a rapport with Andy Dalton, and we like that. I think he's a 75, 80 reception guy, over 1,000 yards and 6-7 touchdowns. Your de facto wide receiver 1 for the early goings anyway. Somewhere in Jarvis Landry land, I think he can manufacture numbers like that. But as far as A.J. Green, and again, we like the Bengals are going to be playing from behind a ton, so they're going to sling it. Tyler Boyd, I love. In fact, if A.J. Green was healthy, I'd probably still love him as my wide receiver 3 or 4. He's not going to be my 1 or 2 because I've already locked up a couple of ones by that point. But he is 31. I feel like A.J. Green, we're going back 3 or 4 years until we've really seen vintage A.J. Green. He missed 6 games in 2016. He did play a full season 2017, 7 games last year. Unbelievable relationship with Andy Dalton when he's on the field. This is not good. We talked about it last week. They were digging around in his ankle. It sounds cloudy. It sounds like, I would guess tonight, 3-4 games. I suppose if you play in numerous leagues and A.J. Green is sitting there round 5 or 6 and he comes back a clean bill of health, then he's a guy that could, obviously help you down the stretch in your home leagues. I think if he is healthy, he's certainly a top 10 NFL wide receiver for certain.
All right, let's look at, go into some other situations that present risk to us on a regular basis, Kyle. Committee running backs, there's always, you never know who's going to end up being the guy. These things can be pretty volatile, as we saw last year was a great example. We look at Rashad Penny and the draft capital invested in him, yet here we are, still Chris Carson pretty much locked in as a lead guy with Penny behind him. We've got the Royce Freeman, Phillip Lindsay. Now we've got some uncertainty in Kansas City with talk of a committee there. Damian Williams kind of a little bit, I don't know, certainly not a long history of high-end production there, I kindly suggest. So when it comes to committee running backs, how do you approach those situations?
Yeah, for me, I am generally always hedging to take the second guy because I feel like we as a fantasy football community generally think we know more than we do in terms of committees, and we price that as such. We think, oh, Damian Williams is 100% the guy. You look at what he did last season, you extrapolate it out, and you're done. Those are his fantasy points, and there is no chance that anything else happens because getting him at in like round 2-3 turn is essentially what that is saying. It prices in some risk, but it really doesn't price in the full risk of him never having gotten more than 50 carries since he played college football. It's not that he hasn't been a workhorse back in the NFL, he has hardly been a back in the NFL through now it'll be going into his 6th year. So for me, early rounds especially, I'm not taking any part of a committee unless it's one in New Orleans, because that's been the one exception to the rule. It's like, throw that one out the books because they can somehow produce two top running backs every single year. But throw that one out, and you're looking at like Damian Williams. I won't have any part of that. And then when you look at if you're fading those guys, the backups have to be enticing unless you're just fading the whole team. And I don't think any of us are fading Kansas City. So for me, I have a lot of Carlos Hyde just because, out of necessity. If you're fading Damian Williams, somebody has to get the carries there. For me, I think it's almost certainly Carlos Hyde for getting carries, even though Darwin Thompson, I do have some of him too because his receiving profile is truly incredible coming out of college. So I think those are both decent picks. But in the later rounds, I don't mind taking any part of a committee, especially when I think the player has a floor. For me, guys like that are typically the receiving backs that I think also have upside. So in past years, it's been like Duke Johnson was a good one in past years, or Chris Thompson, who can be receiving backs, but are also electric when they get the ball and they get a decent amount of carries. Like Theo Riddick is sort of the opposite of that. He's a high floor guy, but he never has that like 5 rushing touchdown ceiling. It's just that's not even in his range of outcomes because he's going to get like a handful of carries. He'll get well under 100 carries in the whole season. He'll be closer to 40, 50. So for me, the high upside, Austin Eckler is a good example of another guy who, when given the opportunity, he can actually rush the ball decently well. Now you're knocking that price. But so in years past, Austin Eckler, Duke Johnson. For me this year, it is Nyheim Hines, just because he's a guy who I think has that similar, if something happens to Marlon Mack, he does have a capability of rushing at all points of the field. And even when Marlon Mack is healthy, you get an incredible receiving floor with Nyheim Hines. You look at what he did in just his rookie year. Guys who produce in their rookie year tend to continue to produce. You put a satellite back type of player, the Duke Johnson type, on an Andrew Luck-led offense. Now it's a little sketchy whether that'll come true, but generally speaking, you put that on the offense, and the touchdown potential is really high. The potential to be incredibly efficient because you can't commit to stop the run or stop running backs receiving when you've got T.Y. Hilton and Paris Campbell out there. There will be a lot of splash plays. So for me, the committee backs I'm looking for are almost always the later ones. And if there is a early committee back or the first back in a committee that is going late, that's, a rare situation that maybe I'll target the top back. But generally speaking, I just want the second back because we think we know more than we do. That's kind of the TLDR, is we always think we know more, when in the end it just becomes the Patriots' fourth running back.
Justin, there are committees at wide receiver, or certainly there are situations where, like the Rams, for example, where they'll say, we don't have a wide receiver 1, we have an open wide receiver. All 3 guys last year when they were on the field, Cooper Kupp, Brandon Cooks, and Robert Woods, were like wide receiver 11 or better the weeks they were there. But how do you look at some of these receiving cores and kind of divine, is it just as simple as kind of what Kyle's saying? Do you go cheap when they're all that productive, or are you looking to find a little different route?
Yeah, and one more committee that I do like, Kyle, is the Patriots between Sony Michel and James White. I mean, there's an exception to the rule as well. I think some of these, every team kind of wants a Nyheim Hines, and you got to find that. It might be Jalen Richard, which I have a ton of ownership to, 68 receptions last year, and of course the Tariq Cohens, who have a higher premium. But yeah, as far as the Rams, I mean, Cooper Kupp was on a tear prior to injury last year, and then Robert Woods did his thing. And of course, Brandon Cooks, just another 1,000-yard receiving yard season for him as well. Ton of miles to feed there. I don't want to play eeny, meeny, miny, mo every week. But again, if you're in one league, I think you got to try to go with the safer guy. And as far as the Rams, I don't know who that is. Kupp's coming off a bad injury. I think Woods is that possession guy, and I think we kind of know what we're getting out of Brandon Cooks at this point in time. I'm predicated his game around Antonio Brown, getting 1,000 yards, and they all kind of fall in the same scope of ADP. So do I want to play eeny, meeny, miny, mo with wide receivers on each team? No. But if you look at a team like the Bucs, where you're paying around early round 2 premium for Mike Evans, but you want to pivot to a round 4 or 5 for Chris Godwin, and Bruce Arians said could have 100 receptions in the Larry Fitzgerald role, you might be able to go that way. But generally speaking, I don't want to gamble and play that game. I want the bona fide wide receiver 1 on every team, and that's typically what I seek to do in any format that I draft, I hammer wide receiver ones, i.e. DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams, where there are players like Geronimo Allison, who I'm eager to see, and you can get him late as well. But again, when you look at a team like the Rams, and from a fantasy angle, it can be mind-boggling, because not only do they have a litany of wide receivers, but now they have somewhat of a cloudy backfield and a young tight end, Gerald Everett. So one football to go around. It's typically a situation where I'll let Bob Harris or Kyle play the guessing game with them. And I suppose this is what makes DFS great, is because you're not married to these guys. But in a season-long league, for my money, it would be Brandon Cooks.
Yeah, I've seen his, what I like about him is his numbers have gone up every year, regardless of the team he's on, right? I mean, it's been an upslope, and I think the Rams have big plans. He's obviously a big playmaker. There's some risk associated with him with some of the head injuries he's had. I want to wrap it up by touching on some of the guys, situations where, let's say, chronic injury situations or chronically injured players, and two that come to mind are Jordan Reed and Tyler Eifert. Like, both have tons of upside. Both are essentially, Jordan Reed is growing on people a little bit. And you look at him, the guy not long ago we considered, in that top tier. But Tyler Eifert, a guy who, has had 13 touchdowns in 15 games, he goes into an offense where maybe they can, it's the Sean McVay offense. Ideally, although Sean McVay hasn't figured it out in Los Angeles, I mean, the tight end has played a dominant role, as Jordan Reed did in Washington when McVay was there. So are these guys, I mean, because it's the tight end position, right? I mean, you could take maybe a chance. You get a steady guy in the mid-range, and you take a flyer on a higher upside guy. I'm fine with that, but I do think you have to mitigate anytime you take these guys. I try to be injury agnostic, and try to just ignore injury situations. Each year is a new year, but there are players where that baggage comes along with them, and I think in the case of Reed and Eifert, that's true. But that's why I get Tyler Eifert in the 15th round, and that's why he's probably my most owned player in best ball this year. Are you guys? You may now tell me how crazy I am.
Well, as far as Tyler Eifert, you're pretty crazy. I mean, he missed 8 games in 2016, 14 in 2017, and 12 last year. So he's one of these guys where you almost get disgusted with, because you saw that one double-digit touchdown season. He's 6'6". He's a big boy, and without AJ Green, they lack weaponry. Now, Jordan Reed is, you want to talk about allure in the price being right and the role being right, and you want to have flashbacks to when he was in the same scope as Jimmy Graham, like a shade under Jimmy Graham and vintage Rob Gronkowski. That was Jordan Reed. Now, there's risk attached with Jordan Reed, as we know, with the headaches. There's just always something with Jordan Reed. But no longer are you paying around 2 or 3 premium for Jordan Reed, and you throw him on a team where he, quote unquote, he's looked as good as he has. You're putting him on an offense that's going to be down a lot, that has a lackluster crew of wide receivers. We don't know who Josh Doxson is. We know that Paul Richardson is a similar to Tyler Lockett that didn't work out in Seattle. And you have Trey Quinn, who's going to probably be in the Jamison Crowder role there. So, wow. We're not doing cartwheels over that cat. Now, when we talk about getting Jordan Reed late, obviously there's risk attached to it, but the juice is worth more than the squeeze when you talk about a guy that is probably, in my book, at the bottom of the sea of mediocrity. So 100% agree with you with Reed. You're not paying a Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Zach Ertz premium as you did 4 years ago for Jordan Reed. I think his output could be easily top 10, which doesn't say a whole lot given the position. But as far as Reed, on that offense that's going to be down a ton, could eventually turn into Dwayne Haskins' safety blanket, and he stays healthy and plays 16 games. We could get 70 receptions, 800-900 yards out of Jordan Reed, and I would assume that he would be have a large role in the red zone as well. So now you're talking 8-9 touchdowns potentially. So all in on Jordan Reed, and again, it doesn't work out, which it hasn't a ton. But if it does work out, you're going to be in really good shape, especially if you're on 12 or 13 best ball teams, as I do.
I'll go around and we'll wrap it up like this. I'm going to just say, when you're dealing with risk, assess it as logically as you can. Try and drop the baggage. The guys who have burned you in the past, try to forget that. I realize it's hard. I don't do it as well as I'd like to. But in all things fantasy, divorce your emotions from your decisions, divorce the name from the numbers, and divorce the past from the present. Every year is a new season. And mitigate, people. It's easy, whether you're drafting a handcuff without overpaying. I'm all about, handcuffing at the right price, not overpaying, but mitigate that risk. And it doesn't have to be direct handcuffing. Just to have the appropriate depth at a position if you take risks at a position. Maybe in best ball, if you do take a Tyler Eifert or Jordan Reed, maybe you take both of them and a third guy. Maybe you go 3 deep at the one position. Go 3 deep at the one, and the same with that quarterback as well. So I think those are all viable strategies. Justin, your final take on this?
Yeah, I mean, as far as tight ends, you guys know how I feel about tight ends. So it's a position where particularly in best balls, I'm going to have 3 tight ends because you just mentioned 2 guys. I mean, Reed and Eifert, injury attached to these guys. But where it is the sea of mediocrity, and I am optimistic about some of these younger guys, which have a sexier appeal in the offseason, as do a lot of players, like the Dallas Goderts of the world and the Jasickis and the TJ Hawkinsons. We know rookie tight ends don't perform well. And I think when things come into fruition, it is the Jimmy Grahams of the world that show their face. And I saw you tweeting earlier, by the way, retweeted something about a guy like Delaney Walker. I mean, why would I roll the dice on an Eifert when I can get Delaney Walker at a great cost? I'm no longer paying the Delaney Walker premium. So I think you're absolutely right. It's a position where not a lot of optimism that I have. So why not grab 3 of these guys you believe are going to float, at least come to the surface in the sea of mediocrity?
Right. And Kyle, go ahead and finish up. And I'm talking about the broader picture, not just tight end, just general mitigation, risk, handcuffing, things like that across the board, Kyle.
Yeah, I think that's generally a good strategy, especially, I say whatever you want about handcuffs. It's not my thing. But I like playing in multiple leagues across multiple formats because then you can get exposure to the upside of these in different ways, like Justin said with DFS. That is a great way. If you just cannot fathom letting Ezekiel Elliott fall past 1.5, stomach it, push those feelings down, and just roster him once we find out he's healthy, or I guess not healthy. He's playing week 1 in DFS. If you can't imagine taking Tyler Eifert for a full season, there's no way he plays. I think it's another situation where I don't know if I view it the same because you have to, Bob, like you said, projecting injuries is a risky business at best, but really it's almost impossible. You think about a guy like Keenan Allen, who everyone said couldn't stay healthy. Now he's like the model of perfect health and plays every game as one of the most steady receivers in the league. So, stomach those feelings of Tyler Eifert certainly not playing, and play him in DFS, or if you want to handcuff running backs, do that in Dynasty, where there are deeper rosters. Find different ways to mitigate that are more advantageous across different formats, across different time frames even, where if you were taking Tyreek Hill early this offseason, you weren't taking on a lot of risk, but you got exposure to that. So just play more fantasy football, I guess, is what we've come down to.
Yes, more. And look, that's a strategy too. Again, the multiple best balls, the multiple leagues you have. I mean, and I know that's not everyone's bag, but that's probably a lot of people's bag who are listening to this podcast. And I mean, and that is one way to minimize risk is play more contests. But we like
play
that
more contests, more flexibility, flexibility.
Right. And you can and there's ways to you could spread your risk within rosters as well. You can kind of pivot through, if you go a little risky at wide receiver, you can play a little safer at running back and quarterback. I mean, you can manage your risk within a roster and within a broader subset. That's the thing. I hope we kind of got you thinking a little bit about how to deal with these situations. There is no exact answer, right? This is not a science. This is an art, a black art, in which we all dabble and have a good time. And so, again, your risk tolerance is going to be a major factor in determining this, as in the number of leagues you're in. All those things will be part of it. But hopefully this will get you thinking. Kyle?
Yeah, I think that summed it up really well, especially with it's not just a blanket statement you can put on it. It's a very individual, artistic basis, and we are beautiful artists, every single one of us. So I think on that note of touting ourselves as artists, we'll bring it to a close. Make sure you check us out on Twitter so you can get your Die Hards Pod updates. You can find Bob at Football Diehard, myself at Kyle Tweets Here, and Justin at Justin Lonero. If you want to see Bob's not smiling face in person, and I'll be standing next to it, find us at the Midwest Fantasy Football Expo. And until next week, thanks for listening.